Okay, so jumping in here, addressing the unavoidable footprint of events. So right out of the gate, when someone says footprint, we think carbon footprint. And I want you to know that today, yes, I'm going to be talking about carbon footprint, but I also want to make sure that we're covering energy and water footprint as well today. So I want to bring all of that into the discussion because those are also important. Of course, energy is related to carbon, but not as many people are talking about water footprinting. So we want to, my organization deals very deeply in water work, and we want to help address water footprints as well. I'm going to go ahead and show you just a little bit more about my organization. So we are a 25-year-old environmental nonprofit. We're based out of Portland, Oregon, but our work is national in nature, and we actually have some programs going international as well, including our water program. Our mission is we bring together partners across all sectors of society to co-create innovative solutions that address climate challenges by restoring freshwater ecosystems and catalyzing a renewable energy future for all. Don't worry, I'm not going to read every single slide, but I think it's important just to make sure you all hear and see our mission. That is why we are here. That is why we exist. We have some amazing programs built around that mission. And these little floating bubbles here, these are our core values as an organization. So the one that jumps out to me the most is partnership. I am the director of environmental partnerships. I love partnerships. I love working with all kinds of organizations. I work with businesses, large and small. I work with events, conferences, sports teams and leagues. I work with universities, other nonprofits. So we also have some public-private partnerships. So I love partnerships, and I love talking to all of these people who are really trying to find their way in the world in a more sustainable, earth-friendly fashion. And that's what I love helping with. And that's what our organization is all about. And just quickly, just a little slightly deeper dive so you can kind of see our program areas. We have three main program areas: water, renewables, and the CE Bright Futures program is a STEM education program. And that fourth one down there, that's kind of mostly where I live. That's in the environmental products and partnerships. And that's some of what we're going to be talking about today, is these tools that you can use to address an unavoidable footprint: carbon offsets, renewable energy certificates, and water restoration certificates. I'll stop there for just a quick second. Any questions about BEF or my organization? Anything I glossed over too quickly that you want to hear more about? Okay, thanks for all the introductions. And oh, a kitty named Lily, I see that. And Sadie, a 7.5-year-old lab. Love it. Thanks, y'all. Okay. So when we talk about an event footprint, there are many elements to an event, as you all know. And most of these elements do contribute in some way to what we call a footprint. And now I'm using the word footprint just as a general word. I think most people generally understand what that means, but basically I'm talking about the impacts of the activities that are the result of putting on an event. Now, it's not just events that are guilty of having a footprint. We all are, as humans, as businesses. We all exist on this planet, and we use energy, we use water, we all have an impact. So everybody's going to have some kind of footprint, but these are some examples for an event of things that you might see in a footprint. So obviously the on-site energy, depending on the type of event. I've worked with some marathons, for example, and their on-site is how many miles of marathon? 20 some miles, 26 miles, with generators every few miles and 10. So energy, is used in various ways at various events. Usually there is some kind of central location, but energy, on-site water, travel, the lodging, the food, the waste, shipping of any materials, of all of these things, certainly there is a lot that can be done to reduce the footprint. And I want to emphasize that it is so important to keep in mind that reduction and conservation and efficiency should always come first, or at least correspondingly at the same time as these, products that I'm going to talk about that can help address the unavoidable footprint. But that's why I'm emphasizing and keep saying unavoidable, because a lot of this footprint, a lot of these elements have things about them that are avoidable. You could potentially use less energy. You could potentially use less water, depending on where you're putting your event on and what tools are available to you there. Travel, you can encourage, if it's a driving event, if people are coming via automobile, you could encourage carpooling, busing. But even so, there's usually still some kind of unavoidable footprint at the end of the day, even when you've made all the best efforts to reduce your footprint. So, I just want to emphasize that this is really about the unavoidable piece of that footprint. That's what I really want to talk about today. And reductions, I'm sure you have lots of other sessions through Muse and about how to reduce and conserve. I did want to ask if anybody has anything to add to this list. Can you think of anything for maybe you have a particular kind of event that you put on that has something outside of this? Does anybody have any additions to what you think might create a carbon, energy, or water footprint from an event perspective? Feel free to unmute yourself and shout out if you have any ideas to add to this.
Flowers. I just wrote it in the chat.
Flowers, yes. For sure. Oh, weddings. Yeah. Flowers. Anything else? Electrical appliances. Yep. Merchandise. Yes. I'm looking at the chat now. Yeah. There's so many things that could potentially add to the footprint of these events. Signage, linens, washing. Oh yeah. Washing things takes a lot of energy and water for sure, especially if you're using hot water. That is one of the best things you can do just as an individual is switch all of your washing to cold water, all of your dishwasher and laundry. There's special, these days, most products are designed for cold water, but you can actually get special products for cold water washing. Yeah. Because it takes a lot of energy to heat water. Okay. Thanks so much for sharing. Okay. So now I want to get into what these tools are. Oops, I have to get back in here. There we go. So environmental products for your unavoidable footprint. So these are the tools that can be used when you've done, as much as you can to reduce that footprint. These tools, carbon offsets, renewable energy certificates, and water restoration certificates. Now, really what these products are, there's a lot of ways of looking at them, and I'll talk about them individually, but overall what these products are is a financial mechanism to bring funding to projects that will have an impact in a positive way on the planet. So if it's carbon offsets, it's a financial mechanism bringing funding to perhaps a forestry project or a landfill gas sequestration project. For renewable energy, it's bringing funding to wind, solar. For water restoration certificates, it's bringing funding to water restoration projects, habitat restoration projects, increasing flows projects. So these are 3 different products that are addressing 3 different areas. But ultimately, they all are the same kind of mechanism, and it's a financial mechanism. So I'll spend just a second on each of these, and then I have another slide that kind of breaks them down more that I'll gloss over, but I will definitely leave for your reference because there's a lot of things that are different about these products, and it's easy to get them confused. So I'll start with carbon offsets. So carbon offsets are the reduction or avoidance or removal of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, again, through a financial mechanism. So this is funding, again, perhaps to a forestry project in Brazil or a forestry project in, Michigan. We have a project out there, or in Alaska. But no matter where it's located, this is the financial mechanism. And by that, I mean, I'm going to use an example, and this example could apply to most of these products. But the example I'm going to use is, we know that cows produce a lot of greenhouse gases. We know this. And we know that farmers have enough challenges just trying to run a farm and, bring their product to market, make money, make a living. They even if they are thinking about climate change, even if they are thinking about how to be more sustainable, where are they going to get the funding to do this? How is a dairy farmer going to get the funding to install a methane sequestration plant on his farm? And then over on the other side, you have a corporation who has greenhouse gas reduction goals, and they've done a lot to reduce their footprint, but they have an unavoidable footprint that they still need to address, and they have a budget to continue to address that footprint, and they have goals they have to meet. And so the corporation's funding can go into the carbon market, and that mechanism feeds funding over to the farmer, not the farmer himself. Typically there's some other party involved, but there's somebody involved who will take that funding and convert it to the sequestration, a methane sequestration or methane capture, plant on his farm, and then convert that then to, once those reductions are made, convert that into carbon offsets that then can be claimed by that corporation for their ESG goals. So that's what I mean by financial mechanism. Without the carbon offset marketplace, you wouldn't have this connection between a corporation's ESG goals and a farmer over here, who doesn't have the funding to reduce the impacts of his farm. Does that make sense? I want to stop there for just a second, because that is probably the most complex concept about these products that I want to make sure everybody understands. Any questions about how that works? And that was a very oversimplified way of doing it, but I want to make sure the general concept is understood.
So, hi, this is Suzanne. Sorry, I'm off camera just because of my location. So basically, you're investing in local projects, in local infrastructure of products or that would be used in the event industry, along the supply chain, whatever that means. But a truck, converting a truck to electric, for example.
Yeah, that's a
delivery vehicles.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, that could be a great.
Yeah, I was just saying,
Go ahead.
catering
Sorry.
trucks, updating a fleet of catering trucks to be all electric locally, so you're not polluting the local economy from the event because it's used in events. Is that kind of what you're saying these kind of projects are?
So it's a little bit more global than that. So it's not typically like your event dollars for an offset is going to go to your fleet or a fleet locally. It's more global than that. These offsets are being created on a global scale. The market is a global market. So like the way I oversimplified that example, that it's one corporation and one farmer, just multiply both sides times like 1 million. You've got 1 million corporations over here and 1 million different potential projects, and the projects are happening, and then the corporations can select from any of those projects which offsets they want to support. It's typically not local though. Local offset projects are challenging because the most important and needs-based projects typically aren't in your backyard. A corporation headquartered in New York City, sure, there might be some opportunities there, but the biggest, need is in the Amazon rainforest, for example, or the biggest need might be, a farmer in, Minnesota. So locality is not really a main component or a core tenet of carbon offsets. It's not that close of a connection. The connection's a little bit farther apart, and it's multiple layers. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. But ideally then you could pick a project that was then maybe serving closer to your area if you needed to. Otherwise, you pick a project that's the greatest need, like you said, Amazon.
Yeah, you could certainly try. I said sometimes we have projects that perfectly align from a geographical perspective, but that's very, I wouldn't say it's rare, but it's not as common. Usually you have a certain set of offset projects. Like BEF, we keep a portfolio of projects. At any given time, we have about 12 to 16 projects available. So you can imagine 12 to 16 projects is not going to put a project in everybody's backyard, but we vet our projects highly. We want to make sure we're carrying a portfolio that covers all different project types and price ranges. so that people have a good portfolio to choose from of offsets. But yeah, there's many out there, but it's not super common that they're going to perfectly align geographically, but it does happen sometimes. Okay, let's see. I think I've already gone a lot longer than I was supposed to on this. So I started with carbon offsets because they are probably one of the more complicated ones. I'll quickly go through RECs and WRCs and then we can move on. And again, feel free to unmute and ask questions at any time. So renewable energy certificates, they are similar to carbon offsets, but they are a mechanism just to support renewable electricity production. So we're talking just about electricity, not other forms of energy, even though energy is in the name. We're talking really about wind, solar, biomass, hydro, things like that. And renewable energy certificates have different standards than carbon offsets, but they are verified and tracked and registered like carbon offsets are, so that they're not double counted in any of that. And renewable energy certificates really are the result of when renewable energy started coming on the grid, utilities just needed a way to track it. So it was a tracking system first, and then it became available for like voluntary purchase for like an event footprint or a business footprint later in its evolution. And now water restoration certificates are modeled after renewable energy certificates, and they represent, so while renewable energy certificates represent 1,000 kilowatt hours of renewable energy, water restoration certificates represent 1,000 gallons of water restored to nature. And water restoration certificates are a BEF product. They're a product that we created because we saw a need to, again, find a financial mechanism that brought more money to fund these water restoration projects that desperately needed funding. So that's kind of a little bit about each of the three products. Any questions about the three of them or the difference between them before I move on? And the next slide actually has a lot more of a breakdown of that, but happy to answer additional questions right now.
I have a quick question for the renewable energy certificate. Let's say I'm doing an event at a venue in New York City or anywhere, and this venue doesn't have solar panels on it, and it doesn't work with an ESCO, and it gets its energy from the grid.
Yeah.
Can I actually get the renewable energy certificates, the RECs, and then claim that the event was powered by renewable energy?
Exactly. That is what RECs do. They give you the power to claim that you were powered by renewable energy. Again, because when renewable energy is produced and put into the grid, it's like a drop of water in the ocean. To track that renewable energy, the actual electron, is nearly impossible, or it is impossible. So renewable energy certificates were created to track that. So if you purchase those renewable energy certificates and they are retired on your behalf or your event's behalf, that is exactly, it's not only a financial mechanism, but renewable energy certificates are the legal mechanism by which you can claim to be using renewable energy. So then you can say you're 100% wind powered or 100% solar powered, or your event is wind powered or solar powered, for sure. That is what they are for. So I don't want to make anyone's eyes cross looking at a graph for too long, but I did, and this again will go out afterwards. You're all welcome to it afterwards, but this is a really great just way to kind of look at all three products and the differences between them in one place. First and foremost, the most important difference is the unit of measure. These are measuring different things. These are accounting for different things. Each product accounts for something different. So an offset is accounting for metric tons. So one offset is 1 metric ton of greenhouse gases, or CO2e. That's kind of shorthand for greenhouse gases. So that is actually measuring greenhouse gases. A renewable energy certificate is only measuring kilowatt hours of renewable energy. And certainly there is greenhouse gases avoidance attached to that, but it is not measuring that. The renewable energy certificate is only measuring the kilowatt hours of renewable electricity. And the water restoration certificate is measuring water, 1,000 gallons of water restored per certificate. And again, while there's probably co-benefits associated with a water project that is reducing or avoiding carbon in the atmosphere, that is not what is being measured, validated, and verified. And that is not being accounted for in the certificate. It's really challenging to account for more than one thing in any kind of certificate or mechanism like this. So they each represent one thing. And there's lots of different claims you can make with each of these. I'm not going to go into scopes 1, 2, and 3. That gets really complicated, but I wanted to put it here anyway. And if anyone wants to follow up with me and talk about scopes, I'd be happy to do that. Scopes basically are the type of emissions coming from your project, your business, your event. They don't technically apply to events, but they do apply to business operations. So that's why I put them here, but I don't want to talk about them too much because they don't really perfectly relate to events. I do want to take one more second to talk about additionality, and then I'll move on from this slide and we can get into more discussion and talk about how to do all of this. How do you do this for your events? But I want to talk about additionality because additionality only applies to carbon offsets and water restoration certificates and not to renewable energy certificates. And what additionality is and why it's so important is that it means that the project would not have happened in the absence of that market. So for carbon offsets, for example, let's go back to that farmer. Again, this farmer does not have funding. There's no grant program. There's no one there to help him. There's no infrastructure already built. So doing that project, bringing funding to that project via, whatever corporate investment, or even sometimes it's a financial institution that's just doing upfront, that's fronting the money and then they sell the offsets afterwards. However, that money is getting to that project, that's what makes it additional, because it would not have happened if there wasn't a need or desire or demand for carbon offsets. It wasn't just going to happen out of the blue. Whereas if there's an activity that's already happening, so for example, capturing landfill gas, that is something that 20 years ago was not happening. And so there were offsets made from that. But now in the US, they don't make offsets from landfill gas capture because it's legislated, it's required. So there's a pre-existing requirement and they have to do it anyway. So there's already a mechanism in place for that reduction of greenhouse gases versus the farmer who doesn't have any mechanism or any funding for it. So that's additionality. And it's just an important concept to understand because a lot of people have questioned, whether carbon offsets are doing any good, and they don't understand that carbon offsets are additional. And it's because it cannot just be something that's happening already. And people think, oh, this is happening already. It's not. It has to pass pretty rigorous standards to become a carbon offset. So again, I'll take a quick breath and stop there for any questions before I move on to the next slide.
Heather, can you briefly explain to people kind of about that, like maybe just take the gold standard? Sure. And so people get an idea of how rigorous that is to get accredited?
Yeah, the full accreditation process for an offset is quite complicated. I actually have a whole other slide on that I didn't include in this presentation, but I'm happy to just talk through it. Oof, okay, so it is not easy to create carbon offsets, period. Anybody who goes into the carbon offset market thinking this is going to be a way to make a quick buck is going to be very surprised. There are layers upon layers of rigor that have to be gone through, of methodologies that have to be approved, verifications and validations. So from the get-go, let's go back to our farmer. The farmer doesn't have the funding. He also doesn't have the know-how. He doesn't know anything about the carbon market. So usually there's another party that comes in that is an expert in the carbon markets and understands all the rigor and all the validation and verification that has to happen. And that's going to be, a company that has, environmental engineers and scientists and mathematicians, a lot of really smart people who can figure out how to calculate all of this. Now we've got the registries, and that is the home of the carbon offset, so to speak. So you've got your project over here, you've got your registry here. Now the project has to align under an existing methodology. So what that means is that the registries have this list of all this basically white papers. It's a lot of boring stuff, a lot of white papers that say, if you're a farmer, you have to check these boxes and it has to align this way for this to be a carbon offset. If you're a forest, you have to align under these boxes. If you're a landfill, it has to align under these methodologies. So there's all these existing methodologies that have taken years and years of incredibly intelligent engineers and scientists to make these methodologies make sense. Now you have a project, you have to plug it into one of these methodologies. It has to fit. so that it can be accepted to the registry. Now say it fits, great. Now you have to validate it by a third party. Can't be the farmer, can't be the firm, can't be the scientist, has to be another scientist or engineering firm, has to come in and validate that this project does actually meet this standard and that it will actually reduce or avoid carbon. Now okay, all those boxes are checked, tons of money is poured in, project is launched. After a year or so goes by, then you have what's called verification. Another party, it's not even a third party at this point, it's like a fifth party verification, has to come in and look at all the numbers and go on site and see what actually happened in that year. And they verify, yes, 100,000 tons of carbon were reduced from this project in this time period. So verification is different from validation. Validation's upfront, verification's ongoing. And it's what basically dictates how many offsets come out of a project annually. They put their stamp on it. Now the projects are issued, which means they are put onto the registry and set free into the public like doves. Then they go out into the market, and then brokers buy them, retailers buy them, people like us, BEF, we buy them, and then we want to sell them to the end users like events, like you folks and other businesses. And we're kind of the grocery store of offsets. So we're going to market and finding the best ones. So that's about as concise a way as I can put it all together, but that hopefully illustrates the amount of rigor, the amount of hoops that have to be jumped through to create an offset. And then at the end of the day, you get the piece of paper, which I love it when people are like, oh, it's just a piece of paper. But now you kind of know what's behind that piece of paper. And that applies also to water restoration certificates. Again, renewable energy certificates don't have quite the same rigor, but they really are more of a tracking mechanism than carbon offsets are. Okay, I'll stop there. Great question, Michelle. Any questions about that? Take a moment. I see some chats. Let me just double check here. Yes, it is good to know that they're more than just a fancy green word. Yes, it's true. Okay. There's something looks like a question here. Renewable energy is already cheaper than generation for many applications. You use renewable energy certificates. So can you use renewable energy certificates to pay for this? Then at the same time generate carbon offsets? Ah, good question. You cannot create carbon offsets and RECs from the same renewable energy project. You have to choose because it's double dipping. This was a question by Neil. A wind project is put up. They have to decide if they're going to sell RECs or offsets. They can't do both. Because if you do both, then you're double counting the carbon that's being reduced from the grid. So you can only do one claim from that. Thanks, Neil. Okay, we're getting there. I have a fun little slide next that's just going to focus on water, and then I'm going to get to the how, just because I think it's really important to emphasize again that water is more than just the water running from your faucet. It's more than, conserving water is about more than just turning it off when you're brushing your teeth or taking shorter showers. Embedded water is the water that it takes to grow or produce or transport or energize all of the products and food and things that we buy and sell and use. So I just want to put some fun little factoids out there for you. So this is kind of the breakdown of what the embedded water looks like in our daily lives. So our diets are about 50% of the water that we consume. Energy is another big one, about 30% of our daily water use. Embedded water use is embedded in our energy usage. So it takes about 5 gallons per hour to run a 60-watt light bulb and about 13 gallons to make 1 gallon of gasoline. So this is water embedded in energy. There's more factoids out there that you can look up, but this is the one that everyone hates to hear. It takes about 37 gallons of water to make 1 cup of coffee. So that is the water to grow and produce, transport, process, roasting the coffee is probably one of the most energy intensive parts of it. So about 37 gallons for a cup of coffee, 634 gallons for a burger. That's everything, the bun, the lettuce, the meat, 700 gallons to make a cotton t-shirt, and almost 3,000 gallons for a pair of jeans. So if you're looking at embedded water, while the daily usage of water for the average person is in the hundreds of gallons, like just the water that you directly use, the embedded water footprint is more like 2,000 gallons per day. Any questions about embedded water and why we should be paying attention to that?
Well, we all know that all these types of things are super intensified for events, for travel, things like that. Like whatever you would normally do at home is going to be really escalated. Is there an easy way to see how these numbers pan out for your event versus something else? Or is it just sort of general numbers of like, if you have X number of people for this many hours, because of all of the linen washing and all of the transport and all the whatever, this is the direction of offset you're gonna, like the quantity of offset you're gonna be looking for?
I am going to talk in just a minute about how to look at events from a quantification standpoint.
Okay.
So I'm going to put a pin in that really quick
Perfect.
and come back to that, because I have a kind of unique perspective on this for events specifically, because I have worked with so many events over the years. So I'm going to come back to that in just a second. Okay, Neil, I see another question from you over here. Can you do both on the same site for different projects? Something that requires diesel, you use certifications half mile, there's a solar. So, I'm not quite sure I understand your question, Neil. I'm sorry. You're talking about using versus generating. So when I was talking about RECs or offsets, I was talking about generation. So the solar farm itself has to choose if when they generate renewable energy, that they can sell offsets or they can sell RECs. They can't do both. Your question sounds like you're talking about using. You can purchase.
Well, we split it.
Yeah.
Let's look at splitting. We have two different power sources at the same event. So one is
Oh, yeah.
non-renewable
Yeah.
that we can use. Yeah.
Yeah, so you can purchase either one actually for your energy. You can use offsets for any kind of energy, electricity, natural gas, propane, generators, but you can only use RECs for electricity. So if you're connected to the grid at your event, you know, you've got a connection to the local grid and you're using electricity on site at a hotel or something, you can use RECs for that, for the electricity only. But like propane, generators, I know a lot of events use generators on site, that you would have to address with carbon offsets. Anything other than
Great. So the boundary, inside of the boundary of the event, you can have both RECs and offsets. Offsets
sure.
for the things that are dirty. Oh, I'm sorry, offsets for the things that are green, RECs for the things that are dirty.
Yes, you can use offsets for any form of energy outside of electricity. You can actually use offsets for electricity too, if you really wanted to, but most people use RECs because it's a one-to-one. You're replacing 1 kilowatt hour of dirty energy for 1 kilowatt hour of clean energy. So yes, hopefully that's not making it more confusing. Thanks.
I'm also talking about generating offsets, not just purchasing them, but if we're bringing in more renewable energy at some point, I know it's challenging, but we do have a lot more data and things to do that. Can you actually generate offsets and use RECs on the same site for different things?
For like a single event?
Mm-hmm.
No, our carbon offset projects have to be ongoing for at least 15 years.
Copy. Thank you.
Yeah, but great question. Okay, so I'm gonna move on. This is my last slide, but I'm not done talking. I know you guys are like ready to go. But I want to talk a bit about how do you do this as an event? What's the like actual process? So I'm just going to tell you the process if you were to work with me on this and my organization, because this is my perspective, and there's probably other organizations you could work with, but I'm going to tell you how I would do it if I were to work with you. So I'm just going to use an expo as an example of an event. I know there's all kinds of events on here, weddings and things, but an expo is good because it's nice and big, and you can scale this work up or down. So let's say we've got somebody planning an expo. So you can literally call me anytime. So sometimes people are like, do I need to call you 6 months in advance or a year in advance or a month after? Anytime you decide you want to do this, call me. If you call me beforehand, we can strategize a little more about, especially about the funding for, because these products cost money. So the biggest question I usually get is like, how do I pay for this as an event planner? Who pays for this? And the answer is lots of different ways. Some of the most common ways that I have seen and have been very successful, so for something like an expo, for example, is to have a sponsor pay for it. It's a great way to get it paid for. It's a great marketing tool for that sponsor. If you have a sponsor that wants to be, and I've seen people come up with cool names for this sponsorship, the climate champion, the water warrior. So add it to your sponsor list. If you're the type of event that has sponsors, add it to your gold, silver, platinum, to all your different, people have lanyard sponsors and happy hour sponsors, for these events. So add it to your sponsor list and see if you can get someone to underwrite the cost of this. They pay for these products or whichever ones you want to use. And that is a great source of funding. Another source of funding is the participants. So if you have people registering for your event on any kind of platform, almost all of them have something you can add where they can click a button to make a donation or add $5 to offset their travel. So participants also are a great way to ask them to either opt in or opt out. Opting out, as we know, the psychology of opting out, better to have an opt out than an opt in, but either way, of course, you yourself as an event producer, or if there's a producer, if you're the planner and there's a producer involved, having them add it to their budget so that they are taking some accountability for their own footprint. That's also great. So having some kind of budget created for it. I think those are the three main ways. Did I miss any? So sponsorship, participants, and then the event budget itself to pay for it. Now, this is where people ask, okay, so then how do I calculate my footprint? How much do I offset? What do I do? So this is where I have a little different perspective from some providers out there. Of course, this whole session was called How to Address Your Unavoidable Footprint. I don't necessarily believe that as an event, you necessarily have to do the nitty-gritty work of calculating your footprint. I think you can still make an impact by offsetting without necessarily having to do that work, because it's a lot of work. You're already doing a lot. Event planning is already very challenging. So I kept hitting this roadblock with the events I was working with my first year or two in this job. Every time I'd get to the point where it's like, I sent them a big sheet of data they had to collect. They were like, I'm out. I was like, okay, I need your kilowatt hours. I need your water. I need you to contact the venue and tell me this. I need you to say, how many linens are you washing? So I'm coming back to you, Alicia. Is that how you say your name, Alicia? Coming back to you, Alicia. I got linens to wash. I got flowers. I got food. How am I going to calculate all this? I'm going to have to hire a consultant that's going to cost more than the offsets itself, right? And I tried to help too, and it was taking a ton of my time. And I was like, dang, this is hard. So for a business, there is an expectation that you would calculate your footprint. So for a typical business, there's greenhouse gas corporate standards. Events are different. There's really no, entity out there policing events saying you need to do this. There's no greenhouse gas protocols for events. So I finally, with the help of some of the events I was working at, came up with a different formula. And it makes your claims so much cleaner as well. So if you did, do all the work to calculate your footprint, you put it out there, this event's carbon neutral, and then someone pings you about it, they're like, but hey, what about that generator over there? Hey, what about those linens? Hey, what about the flower? Did you put that in your footprint? You can easily get torn down. People love to find the holes in your work. So a much cleaner, easier way to do it is a per unit approach. And by per unit, I mean, for example, per attendee, per pound of food, per runner, per guest, attaching it to the people is one of my favorite ways to do it. I've had people do it other ways. I actually did have an event that when I gave them my presentation and they heard about the coffee, they were so upset. They actually did it per cup of coffee. It might've been a coffee related event, but depending on your event, your unique thing, we'll do a per unit thing. And it doesn't have to necessarily correlate perfectly with any kind of footprint, but it gives you a clear claim. We're going to offset 500 pounds of carbon per person and 500 gallons of water. The other great thing about this is you're not claiming that you're neutral. You're not claiming that you're offsetting your entire footprint. You're just saying, we care about this, so we're going to make this commitment. It's like when people say, I'm going to plant a tree. You know, that doesn't necessarily correlate with anything. Or I'm going to give $10 per participant to the local Humane Society. So this method is so much easier, quicker, and it can work with your budget. So that's the other thing. We can do a little reverse engineering on your budget. You got a sponsor that's giving you $5,000 for this. I'll take $5,000, reverse engineer it, divide it by how many attendees you think you might have and how much per attendee, how much money, say it's $5 per attendee. That's about half a carbon offset. That's about 1,000 pounds. So that was a really quick example, but I can reverse engineer the claim for you. Okay, I'm going to stop again for just a second. Let that sink in for a second. So questions about that piece, I can talk more about it, but I just want to stop there and pause because that's